So I've mentioned the legislative branch in Congress a number of times, and I'm hoping you're getting the idea that the true power to make laws, to make change in the government, in the federal government, is not so much the president as it is Congress. If there was one branch of the government that most represents the Leviathan, that beast that we need to be watching and keeping under control, it is Congress. Because there are those who question whether Congress is really acting in our benefit. Are they really doing things? Are they really going to work every day, trying to help us out? Or do they have other motivations? Are they serving our needs, or are they serving someone else's needs? So the powers of Congress have changed quite a bit from the original Constitution, from the way the government was imagined by the founders. And the main reason has to do with something the founders wrote, and that is the elastic clause, that allowance for Congress to exercise any powers it deems necessary and proper, which is really vague language. It's not that difficult for Congress to figure out how to explain that something is very necessary and proper. Oh yeah, totally our power. We can totally do that. For example, income tax. When America was first born, there was no income tax. There was taxes, there just wasn't a tax that was based on how much money you made. And there was no federal programs like Social Security, welfare, disability. These things didn't exist. And they didn't exist until long after the founders died. So let's take a little detailed look into what Congress looks like. How is it organized? So it has what's known as a bicameral structure. That means there's two houses. You might remember that from the Virginia and the New Jersey plan, in which there was a balance that was supposed to be created between Democratic representation in the House, which was supposed to be the half of Congress that most represented the people, compared to the Senate, which doesn't change much. People, when they get elected to the Senate, they stay in the Senate a lot longer. So it takes a lot longer to see new faces, new types of ideas, because we also want stability. When there's a lot of change, there can be confusion and there can be a lot more disagreements that can prevent things from getting done. So that's why you want a more stable Senate. But the Senate doesn't change much. So that's why we want the House, so that we also have one that can reflect current times if the Senate is maybe kind of lagging. So first up, the Senate. There are 2 senators per state. That means with 50 states, we have 100 senators. To be a senator, you have to be 30 years old, you have to have been a citizen for 9 years, and you have to be a resident of the state that you represent. Those are the official formal requirements of becoming a senator. However, there are some informal requirements, some unwritten requirements. The major one being you need to be rich. Poor people, middle-class people, upper-middle-class people do not get to be senators. Not because they're not allowed, but senators who are in power for a long time end up spending hundreds of millions of dollars to stay there. Campaigning is very expensive for senatorial campaigns. And yes, there's a lot of donations and help, but the point is that's really not a good starting place if you want to be a part of the federal government. Now, there's a lot of similarities between the House and the Senate. They both vote. They both have rules for majority or supermajority types of votes to see what laws will pass and what laws will not pass. One characteristic, one feature of the Senate that is different than the House is the filibuster. You see, before a vote happens, senators get a chance to stand up and make an argument to try to convince others to vote for or against any particular action. Now, there's no time limit. The only rule is, as long as you keep speaking and no one has to help you keep standing, you can keep talking forever and hold up the entire process, because nothing can happen, no voting, no discussions, nothing can go on while someone is talking. That's known as a filibuster. When someone stands up and just keeps talking, even if they're just reading out of the phone book, they can hold the Senate hostage until that individual gets the Senate to do what he wants. Now, the reason why we don't see too many filibusters is because there is a way to break a filibuster and kick that guy off the stage, and that's called cloture. That's the only voting that can happen while someone is up and speaking, whether it's a filibuster or not. And that vote is cloture. You can vote to kick him off the stage. If you get at least 60 members out of the 100 senators that are present to say, yes, shut him up, kick him out, then they can have security remove him from the stage. Moving on to the House of Representatives, in total there are 435 representatives, and they are divided evenly among the states based on population, with no state getting less than one each. So a very small state like Wyoming only gets one. Very large states like Texas and California, they can be in the 40s and 50s easily. And every 10 years, we recount everybody to find out if the numbers need to be adjusted or not. That's called apportionment. That is the distribution of seats in the House of Representatives based on population of the states. However, every 10 years, when the new population count is out and it's time to decide if we need to rebalance all the counties, all the voting districts, there's a big fight that breaks out every single time. Not a physical fight, it's behind closed doors, it's in our state legislatures over how to rewrite those districts. And that's something that's known as gerrymandering. This one is a little bit hard to explain, so I'm going to try to show it to you on screen. Normally you might think like, okay, well we have this block of people, so we'll just cut it into 4 different evenly divided districts. That's never how it works though, because if you can redraw it something like this, you can divide up certain groups of people that vote against you so that you minimize their vote. So if you can turn a majority of one district and slice out a chunk of them and put them in another district, then you can turn them into a minority, so effectively those groups of people's votes get canceled out simply because of the way that you've drawn the districts. And there's not really much in the way of a check on this. The Supreme Court has kind of given warnings like, hey, don't be too bad with it, but nothing really clear. So it happens every 10 years, depending on which political party is in power at the time. But going back to actual membership in the House, the requirements are that you have to be at least 25, you have to have been a U.S. citizen for at least 7 years, and you have to be a resident of the state that you are representing. Informal qualifications are not that different from the Senate. You don't have to be quite as wealthy. It is not totally unrealistic to see someone who's not rich become a member of the House, because it's not quite as expensive to get elected. So if you can raise enough money, if you're really good at convincing people to give you donations, you may not need to spend any of your own money, which makes it very realistic that someone who's not rich can actually get into the House. And one of the reasons why it's not so expensive is because there's so many more seats, 435 seats. That's a lot of seats that are out there. Sometimes people run for election for these seats and there's no one else even running against them because some districts just don't even care. But because there's so many representatives, they are divided into committees. Committees divide the workload of what the entire House of Representatives has to do. All the topics that affect our entire lives as citizens in the country that have to be decided by Congress are broken up into pieces, and different members work on different parts of legislation. So some will work on education, some will work on defense, some will work on healthcare, so on and so forth. But while writing new laws and passing new laws is the major duty of the Congress, another thing Congress does is they keep in check the power of the president, the executive branch. And they can do that in a number of ways. One is through impeachment. If they think you broke the law, they can remove the president from office, kick him out without a popular vote. That's never happened. It's come close a couple times, but it's never actually happened. They can also censure a president, which is really more like a strong warning, kind of letting him know, we're thinking about impeaching you, so whatever you've been doing that's making us mad, stop doing it, or we're going to kick you out. So it's a strong warning. They also have what's known as the power of the purse. The power of the purse is the ability to fund or take funds away from anything the government does, including the president. So, for example, the president is the leader of the military. He's the one that decides where to send tanks and bombs and planes. But the military isn't free. Where does he get his money to spend on the military? He gets it from Congress. So Congress would probably never do this in this example, but if they wanted to, they could. They could say, oh, you think you're the leader of the military? Okay, fine. Be the leader of the military with $0 for a budget. Go. Good luck. They can do that. That's powerful. If you have no money to do something, you're not going to do it. And Congress has that power over the president. They control his budget. They can take away his pencils if he wants by giving him a zero budget for office supplies. That actually did happen. And to back up those kind of things, one thing Congress has over the president is called oversight, in which they hold hearings, like court proceedings, trials, where they can force witnesses to appear, even the president himself, to stand trial and testify about their behavior. If they've done anything to violate laws or violate the public trust, violate the social contract, and that can bring a lot of pressure on the executive branch. That can, even if there is no consequence, even if there's no guilty verdict, it can make someone look really, really bad. So that's more incentive for the president to think very carefully before he engages in any kind of action if he's got a Congress that's not happy with him. An example of this is when Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State. That means she was the president's most important person for dealing with leaders of another country. Well, during her tenure as Secretary of State, there was an American embassy that was attacked on September 11, 2012 by terrorists. And there was an investigation into Hillary Clinton questioning whether there was something she could have done to have prevented it. But that's what congressional oversight is about, is holding our leaders accountable, our leaders from the executive branch. And that's about all there is. If you have any other questions about Congress and how it works, please let me know in class.